Hi, this is David Dickens, and today we are going to talk about target date maturity funds. Chances are really good that in your 401k plan, or if you're already retired, you have a target date maturity fund. And there was an article in the Washington Post said the problem with target date maturity funds. So today we want to decide, is there truly a problem? And if so, what is it? I'm going to go get Walter, and we'll get started.
Do you need help protecting your finances as you enter retirement? David Dickens of KC Financial Advisors has got you covered. Welcome to the Cover Your Assets KC podcast.
Back on another episode of Cover Your Assets KC. Walter Storholt here with David Dickens. Overland Park, Kansas is where David is, but serving clients all across the country. Wherever you are, you can find us online at coveryourassetskc.com. David is the president and wealth advisor of KC Financial Advisors. And we've got a great show on the way today. You teased it for us already, David. Target date funds. I am excited to learn a little bit more about these. What's appropriate, the differences between the 2065, which is a hard thing to even think about that far into the future, and 55, 45, 35, and then the differences between the different companies that have various target date funds. Like, there's a lot to unpack, to use that common phrase these days. There's a lot to unpack in this topic, and everybody, even if they don't understand really what these target date funds are doing, has probably been exposed to them at this point.
Exactly. They are everywhere. It's almost impossible to think that somebody listening to this podcast does not have, either in their 401k or their IRA rollover, that they don't have a target date maturity fund. They become that popular. It's kind of a set it and forget it feel to them. And so there was this Washington Post article that talked about, the problem with target date maturity funds. This thing came out in late July. And so it got me thinking, well, is there really a problem with target date maturity funds, or do they do what basically they say they're going to do? So today what I want to do is unpack. I could have chosen any companies. A lot of companies have these. I chose Vanguard because they are everywhere. There are billions of dollars in these Vanguard funds. So we want to look at, if you're 25 years old, you would default to the 2065 fund. That's the year you're going to turn 65 or 66. If you're 35, it would be the 2055 fund. If you're 45 years old, it would be the 2045 fund. If you're 55 years old, the 2035 fund. And if you are basically retired, 65 years old, you might have some in the 2025 fund. What we want to do today is to say, well, what are the differences between all of those funds? And what should I, as either a do-it-yourselfer or somebody who works with an advisor and you have target date maturity funds in your plan, what should I know about those? And are they, I hate to use the word safe, but you know what? Are they going to help me accomplish my goals? So that's where we're going, and hopefully I throw out just the right number of numbers so that this doesn't become difficult to follow. But I think I'm going to be able to explain this such that there's a takeaway for everybody and I don't get too deep into the weeds.
I think you'll be just fine at accomplishing that goal, David. No worries on that front. My ears are perked up. I went and looked at our retirement accounts, David, for my wife and I. I do not have any target dates, from what I can tell, in my 401k. And I think we made that choice because I checked my wife's, and hers is, her various accounts are littered with them. So we've got a few different 2055 accounts happening in there. So
yeah, and that's super common. For the almost impossible chance that somebody listening to us doesn't know what these are, companies created these, 15, 20, 30, 25 years ago. Let's just say that you're saying, well, it's in my 401k. I don't really know whether I should have stocks or bonds, but I know that I'm going to retire in 2055, and you're about 35 years old. You might just slam all of your balances into the 2055 fund. And maybe your 401k uses Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard. Doesn't particularly matter to you. You're just doing the set it and forget it type of strategy. That's all a target strategy fund is. As you get closer and closer to retirement, these funds automatically shift more out of stock and into bond, into something more stable and more conservative. And where I hope to get to today is that what they actually do, and is it the right thing to do? Again, I looked at Vanguard. I can very quickly compare the 2000, if you're 25, 35, or 45 years old, and you're in a Vanguard Target Retirement Fund, you pretty much have the exact same portfolio.
Interesting. Even though we've got years of separation between those groups.
If you're 25, 35, or 45 years old, you'd think that there would be a somewhat big difference in how you're investing. But
there's a lesson embedded in there, isn't there?
The lesson is, most people in their 401ks, if the market's going down, they're just going to stop looking at it, which is a great strategy. It's just really hard to do when you're 55 or 58 or 62 or 70. But when you're young, your balances are relatively small. The volatility is going to be great. But in any of these three funds that I looked at, if you're 25 years old, you're allocated 88.25% to stocks. If you're 35, you're 88, you're the same. There's hardly a difference. So 25-year-old and 35-year-olds are 88% in stock. If you're 45, you're 82% in stock. So these accounts are incredibly similar. What did these companies do? Well, Vanguard, they all do this. They will put you, so the holdings, the top 10 holdings in any of these target date funds, well, 53% is in Vanguard's total stock market index mutual fund. One mutual fund, it tries to mimic the entire stock market, the entire U.S. stock market. That's 53%. And another 36% is in the entire international stock market. It's a basket of mutual funds jammed together inside of a target date retirement mutual fund. And there's not much difference whether you're 25, 35, or 45 years old. What should you know? Well, over the last year, these accounts are up 22%, 22%, and 21%. And you're killing it. But over the last 3 years, they've averaged 5.1% a year, 5.09% a year, and 4.7% a year. So we've had a really good year, but we've had an underperforming past 3 years. So, and everybody listening to this knows that was 2022. And what you probably did was stop looking at your statements in July and August and September of 2022 because you knew the market was getting killed. Over the last 10 years, of course, 2065 hasn't been around that long, but 2055 over the last 10 years has averaged 8.5% a year. Well, that's what you want. 2045 fund, if you're 45 years old, that's averaged not 8.5% a year, but 8.4% a year. Well, that's also what you want. You want, as you're working on your career, you're taking care of your mortgage, you're raising some kids, maybe you're working on your marriage, the last thing you really want to do is mess around with reallocating your 401k. So since you're so many years from retirement, you just stick it in one of these target date funds. And you know what? It's going to work out just fine when you're that far away from retirement. The maximum drawdown, Walter, you probably have I'd hate to put you on the spot, but you know what? I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
You probably have a decent guess. You probably have a really good guess as to what the maximum drawdown over the past 5 years has been in these three funds that are about 88% allocated to stock.
Oh, I'm going to guess 20 to 25%, something like that.
I knew you'd be really close.
Okay.
It's 31.4%.
Oh, 31? Okay. 2022 was a little worse than I thought.
Yeah. Let's say you had a $100,000 401k. Well, at some point, you might have opened your statement and saw that it was only $70,000.
Yeah, that would have been uncomfortable.
Yeah, but you know what? You're young. The wisdom there is to just work on the amount that you save, the percentage of what you earn that you save, and stop looking at the balance and stop trying to time the market when you're 25, 35, 45, even 55. Let's take a look at the 2035 fund, and that would be for a 55-year-old. They're going to retire in about 10 years. And that's about 2035, the year 2035. So that, instead of being 88% allocated to stocks, is 68% allocated to stocks. And you've got about 3% cash, so you've got about 30% in bonds. And that is, that also just has a couple of different mutual funds in it, just allocated to stocks versus bonds, and 27% in international stock. The interesting thing here is the maximum drawdown. Let's say that when you were 25 or 30, you said, well, I'm just going to use this 2035 fund because at that point, you were young and you were still going to retire in 2035. That maximum drawdown would include the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. So, Walter, I'm not going to ask you for your best guess there. But that maximum drawdown was 46%.
Ouch.
Now, everybody pretty much remembers that the S&P was down about 55% in the great financial crisis, the 2008, 2009. So to have this account, back then, it would have also been 88%. So to have it have been down 46% at one point, that's not a big surprise. And you were young back then, etc. Over the last 5 years, this one has had a 27% drawdown. Now that's not really that fun if you're in the 50s, but at that point, you still had 15 years to go to retirement. So those are all marching toward retirement. And once you get into your 50s, these funds start trimming back the amount of stock allocation you have. And that all makes, to me, and hopefully to our listeners, logical sense. Your balance has gotten larger, and your risk tolerance has probably gotten a little smaller. But what about when you're 1 year from retirement? The 2025 fund, you probably sit there and think, this thing has gotten really conservative. And you would be correct depending on how you define conservative. So quick little reminder, when you were 25, 35, or 45 years old, these accounts had you about 88% in stocks. At 55 years old, they had you, let me pull this up, they had you 67% in stock. But now that you're 65 years old, they have you 51% in stock, 3.5% in cash, and 45% in bonds. So kind of almost 50-50. Now, some listeners are going to say, well, if I'm 1 year from retirement, I don't want to be that aggressively invested.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the number was that high, to be honest.
But I've got clients that would say, well, why would I want to get that conservative if I'm going to live to 90? So that is the difference between person's risk tolerance and what they're willing to endure in a down market. Here's what the 2025 portfolio looks like today. It has a maximum drawdown, not the 20, what did we say? The
27%,
roughly 31% or something.
Yeah, and then 31. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this had a maximum drawdown of 21%.
Dating back to the financial crisis as well?
No, I didn't go back.
Okay.
That would have also had a 41%.
Okay.
But over the last 3 to 5 years, we've had a 21% drawdown. 67% of the stocks are in North America, so it's heavily weighted to U.S. stocks. You got some Europe and you got some Asia. The bonds are only 2% of them, 3% of them are less than a year. And 31% of the bonds are greater than 10 years. So it's, distributed. But you've got a kind of a wide distribution of bond holdings as well. So let's say that at this point, your portfolio was $1 million and you had that 21% drawdown. Well, you just have to be fine with your $1 million in your 401k a year or two before retirement becoming $785,000. And if you're comfortable with that volatility, then that's exactly what you're getting in a target date fund that has you retiring next year. I often get the question, if they saw the great financial crisis coming, why didn't they just get out of the way? Why didn't they take evasive action? Or the COVID thing, why didn't they, that went down, the market went down, 26, 28%. why didn't they just get out of the way? And the answer is that's not their job. What they do, they're working on a set it and forget it, and they're not trying to make any determination about what the market might do in the next 3 months, 6 months, year, or 2 years. They're trying to be very predictable based on the goals that they set up for these accounts during good times. They're not responsible for getting you out of the way when the stuff is hitting the fan. And so that's your job. And inside of a 401k, unless you're pretty tuned in, you're unlikely to do that, which is why riding it out in your 20s, 30s, and 40s is what you almost certainly should do. In your 50s, especially your late 50s and 60s, you might want to take some avertive action, but that's up to you. That's not up to the managers of these target date funds.
Makes a lot of sense. And I believe the second angle you wanted to kind of take at this equation was, well, you look at target date funds out there and everybody's got their version. We've got the Ford and the Chevy and the Toyota versions of these different year target date funds. And
nice.
What are our differences here?
Yeah. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to see, well, now that we've talked about what it is if you're a 65-year-old 1 year away from retirement, was there any real difference between the Vanguard, the Schwab, and the Fidelity 2025 funds? And the answer is, yeah, there are. There's not just one template that everybody follows. Each company puts together their own idea of what a 65-year-old should have 1 year before retirement. So, for instance, Vanguard has you 50% in stock. Schwab has you 47% in stock. Fidelity has you 55% in stock. So Fidelity is a more aggressive account. Maximum drawdown is a little bit higher in the Fidelity. Well, that's obvious because their allocation to stocks is higher. What about the type of stocks? Well, for instance, the lowest allocation to North American stocks is Vanguard at 67%. The highest is Schwab. It has more of a U.S. focus. That's 80%, almost 81% in U.S. stock. And then the allocation differences would be, Vanguard has almost 18% in Europe and 13% in Asia. So if you want to be U.S. centric, well, you're going to be happier in the Schwab Target 2025. It's got the least allocation to stock and the highest allocation of the stocks they own. It's the highest allocation to U.S. stock. So if that marries up best with your view as an almost retired person, then that's going to be your best option. Schwab would be better than Vanguard or Fidelity. Maximum drawdown, they're not dramatically different. Fidelity, which of course is the most aggressive, that's 20 over the last 5 years. The maximum loss, the maximum drawdown has been almost 24%. The other two are right around 21%, so not a dramatic difference. The expense ratio is kind of interesting, and this is especially for do-it-yourselfers, if you are using an advisor and they are using these types of funds. Hopefully your advisor is looking at the costs that these funds are charging you to use these type of target date funds. And the difference is actually quite large. Vanguard charges you 0.08% of 1%, 0.08. Fidelity is the highest. It's 0.61, so over 0.5%. From little less than 0.1% to over 0.5% difference between Vanguard and Fidelity.
That feels pretty significant.
That's pretty significant, especially over a 10-year period. And then Schwab is right in the middle at 0.3, 0.34, actually. Those are the biggest differences between the super short 2025 I'm almost retired fund. If you happen to go and dig out the Washington Post article, I thought it did a nice job of drawing people's attention to, well, reminder of what are target date maturity funds and are they good? For me, the takeaway was this, or the takeaways were this. No strategy works all the time. And what these strategies do is keep you pretty fully invested when you're young and start dialing back the risk as you get closer to maturity. And they do that. Whether the allocation to stock is right for you based on your personal risk tolerance, well, that's something you have to decide for yourself, and you won't really know, especially in the age 55 or age 65 funds. You won't really know until you dig a little bit deeper under the covers. If you don't know, but you're working with an advisor, well, ask that question next time you're meeting. Make sure that you know, or that he or she knows and can look up, well, where are we with those funds? And now that I know a little bit more detail, am I still comfortable? And then the drawdowns can be fairly significant. So I mentioned in the 2025 fund, it's still, even with that short of it, you're basically retired. You still had over a 20% drawdown in the last 3 years. And first of all, you have to be comfortable with that. Second of all, you probably should be comfortable with that if you have somewhere in your strategy, you've set aside 2, maybe 3 years of spending income, that you're not taking money out of these target date funds, but maybe you have money set aside in some money market funds, which currently are paying 4 or 5%, maybe in some bank CDs, maybe in some short-term fixed annuities. Depending on what your short-term bucket strategy is, your target date maturity fund should still perform its function, but you might not want to sell things out of it over the next year, 2 or 3, if we have a big down market. That's when you'd want to spend your money market funds and your short CDs. So having that as a second part of your strategy would be really important, especially if you have an average or lower than average risk tolerance.
Great breakdown, David. Really appreciate it. I think you're right that the Washington Post article did a nice job kind of introducing this topic. Your color commentary has, I think, really added some extra level of education here. We can link to this article in the description of today's show, by the way. If anyone wants to check it out, feel free to do so. Just check the description. You'll see the link there. I think it's a lot of food for thought for folks who are going to take a look at their portfolios, maybe see some of these, or if they don't see any, that might be an interesting question. Why haven't I taken advantage of these? Was there something that steered me away from them in the past?
Yeah, and the best time to do that, we're pretty pretty near all-time highs. So the best time to take a look at this is now, not when we're in the middle of a 20 or 25 or 30% drawdown. That's the worst time to do it. So be a little proactive. Take a look at it now while we're close to all-time highs, and you'll probably do better during the next downturn than otherwise.
Excellent. I feel like the one takeaway I've had here, David, a couple of takeaways that I've certainly had, but one that I'll mention is not quite as much downside protection as I would have assumed in these products. So I was still surprised to see some pretty decently high downturn figures, even for those later, or I guess earlier in terms of the date, target date funds. I was assuming we'd be down in the 5% risk or 10% risk, maybe at the max in those numbers. So that would be definitely maybe a misconception that I had about them, that there was a little more protection than there appears to be.
Along those lines, and I guess maybe this is the bonus at the end of the episode, I did look at Vanguard's 2020 fund. In other words, somebody that retired 5 years ago.
Ah, okay.
And their stock allocation is 37%. So they do continue, let's say 5 years from now, you continue to own that 2025 fund. The 2020 fund is probably retired by then. But I would expect that they would continue to reduce the stock exposure as you get further and further into your retirement. Not always the case. You'd want to check that out, but that's what they've currently done with their 2020 fund.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, is there a 2010 or 2000 fund still sitting around for folks who are deep into their retirement, or you're saying they will retire those products at some point?
I tried to look at it with my analytical software, and I couldn't find a Vanguard 2015 fund.
Interesting. Okay.
I didn't dig into it any further than that. It just didn't come up. So I'm assuming it's been retired, but that might not be the case. There's $37 billion in the 2020 fund right now at Vanguard.
Wow. So all that money's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's way bigger than I thought. Comparison's sake, $77 billion in the 2025 fund.
Okay.
So about half. I bet those people are probably spending down that money as well. Anyway, that was the bonus 3 minutes of the episode.
There you go. I love it. Hey, if you got questions about something that popped up on today's show, don't hesitate to reach out to David Dickens. It's very easy to do so. I'll give you a couple of ways. You can call him at 913-317-1414. Ask some questions that might be on your mind about your own retirement and financial future. Or you can schedule a time to meet to come into the office or meet remotely to discuss your situation. You can also go online to coveryourassets.kc.com. coveryourassets.kc.com, and you're going to be able to get lots of information there on the website, resources, past episodes, all sorts of good stuff there. We'll link to that contact info in the description of today's show, so you can find it easily as well. Loved the breakdown today, David. Really appreciate your guidance, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we got Labor Day coming up, so everybody have a safe, fun Labor Day. I'm going to be hanging in Dallas, so I might just do this next podcast remotely from Dallas. We'll see how it works
on the
out.
road. Very nice.
On the road.
All right. Well, we will look forward to that conversation, my friend.
Okay, me too. Thanks,
Safe
Walter.
travels to you and anybody else that'll be on the road in the upcoming holiday, and we'll talk to you again soon right back here on Cover Your Assets, KC. Advisory services offered through Creative One Wealth, LLC, an investment advisor. KC Financial Advisors and Creative One Wealth, LLC are not affiliated. We are an independent financial services firm helping individuals create retirement strategies using a variety of insurance products to custom suit their needs and objectives. The information and opinions contained in this program have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are given for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. The information is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. This material has been provided by a licensed insurance professional for informational and educational purposes only and is not endorsed or affiliated with the Social Security Administration or any government agency. It is not intended to provide and should not be relied upon for accounting, legal, tax, or investment advice.